So on Monday night, here's what Tucker Carlson said on his program.
But it's not just political protesters the government is spying on. Yesterday, we heard from a whistleblower within the U.S. government who reached out to warn us that the NSA, the National Security Agency, is monitoring our electronic communications and is planning to leak them in an attempt to take the show off the air. Now, that's a shocking claim, and ordinarily we'd be skeptical of it. It's illegal for the NSA to spy on American citizens. It's a crime. It's not a third world country. Things like that should not happen in America. But unfortunately, they do happen, and in this case, they did happen. The whistleblower, who is in a position to know, repeated back to us information about a story that we are working on that could have only come directly from my texts and emails. There's no other possible source for that information, period. The NSA captured that information without our knowledge and did it for political reasons. The Biden administration is spying on us. We have confirmed that. This morning, we filed a FOIA request, a Freedom of Information Act request, asking for all information that the NSA and other agencies have gathered about this show. We did it mostly as a formality. We've also contacted the press office at both NSA and the FBI. We don't expect to hear much back. That's the way that usually goes. Only Congress can force transparency on the intelligence agencies, and they should do that immediately. Spying on opposition journalists is incompatible with democracy. If they are doing it to us, and again, they are definitely doing it to us, they are almost certainly doing it to others. This is scary, and we need to stop it right away.
Now, the NSA has responded on June 28, 2021. Tucker Carlson alleged the National Security Agency has been monitoring our electronic communication and is planning to leak them in an attempt to take the show off the air. This allegation is untrue. Now, listen to this. Tucker Carlson has never been an intelligence target of the agency, and the NSA has never had any plans to try to take his program off the air. NSA has a foreign intelligence mission. We target foreign powers to generate insights on foreign activities that could harm the United States, with limited exceptions, e.g. an emergency. NSA may not target a U.S. citizen without a court order that explicitly authorizes targeting. Somebody who knows an awful lot about this is Sharyl Attkisson, who has been spied on herself by the United States government, investigative reporter and host of Full Measure with Sharyl Attkisson, and also the author of Slanted. Hi, Sharyl. How are you?
Hey, Glenn. How are you?
I'm good. I don't know how people come to this leaning toward the NSA. I mean, everything that has happened recently, and quite honestly, if you want to be a free people, you shouldn't give the benefit of the doubt right away to the government on something like this. What do you think's happening?
You know, I've tracked the proven instances. These are just the ones that have been reported publicly through documentation, you know, actually for decades, but starting in the 2009 time period, we know the government was proven to have spied on members of Congress, their staff, journalists. We know that intelligence officials gave false information on these questions when they testified to Congress. So again, like you say, the default position should be, we know this is being done and has been done. And if they can prove otherwise or are upfront and forthright with their information, perhaps we could listen to that, but they never are.
Yeah. We know that they have the ability to capture all communications in the United States. We know that they do capture all communications, but they say it's just on the meta level. However, if you're wanting to target somebody, it's not that hard to do it. And the NSA says, unless it's an emergency. Well, if the United States government is convinced that the largest insurrection ever to happen since the Civil War was January 6th, and that came from Trump supporters, and Trump supporters watch and listen to me, Tucker Carlson, you, well, then doesn't that qualify in some twisted way to a dirty government that, yeah, they have the right to spy or to read emails and texts?
Of course, excuse me, I'm sneezing. Of course they do. They will find a way to justify whether they believe it or don't believe it. They can find a way to put down on paper the necessity, at least make the argument that this is something that they must do and they're authorized to do for national security. But because it's done in secret and through the FISA court, where we usually never know what the justification is that's presented, and we're never meant to know, we can't say whether they did it properly. We can't tell whether they manufactured information like they did against Carter Page, the Trump associate, to spy on him. But I would say, Glenn, I've been talking about this for years since I got the forensic proof that it happened to me. Without them ever being stopped and nobody being held accountable, of course we can expect more of the same. There's been no change, no deviation from the path of illegally and improperly spying on people. And in my case, I learned through courts, I still have a case pending, but through a lot of court action over the years, I learned that government officials enjoy a great deal of immunity from their crimes or acts that they commit or oversee while in office. Congress would have to change the law to actually hold them accountable for some of these surveillance abuses, and none of that's been done.
It is truly terrifying when you when you think and read, excuse me, what the president, the White House at whitehouse.gov has just put out on the way that they're going to attack domestic terror. They openly say they're going to be working with high tech to find those people who are insurrectionists, extremists, but also all those that they may have infected or affected, and who the leaders are. Well, all you have to do is define things a little differently than the average American, which we're learning new definitions of everything right now. So it's really more likely than possible. When you see that and nobody is reacting, how do we save freedom?
Well, it's a good question, and that's the problem with this crisis and confidence that's been created in our institutions and our law enforcement and our intelligence agencies. So many people think there are double standards, political motivations, that it would be one thing if a trusted agency announced they were legitimately looking at these things, but we see through recent efforts in history and context that too often they are not, and that they're violating laws and policies to do the things that they're doing. So there's this great sense of this feeling of hopelessness and even chaos, I think, among those who would like to believe that there's a sense of law and fairness and that our intelligence community and law enforcement officials are going to be doing things fairly. But I think a lot of people know that that's not been the case.
You have, we've had Soros's people and everybody else. I mean, I have people going through my garbage, et cetera, and they have done a good job of smearing me. Can you describe to the American people the difference between what's happened to me and then what's happened to you or could happen to Tucker if the United States government is doing it?
Well, the United States government, as you know, has every tool at their disposal, every advanced form of technology, access through the telephone companies, which they have been requiring to cooperate with them since prior to 2001 on collecting different kinds of surveillance. I did a story that surprised me at the time on the former head of Quest, which is a phone company back in the day that he said that they were all these phone companies already had dark contracts prior to 2001 from our intelligence agency worth hundreds of millions of dollars to collect information. And he said that in 2001, prior to the terrorist attacks, by the way, he was brought into a SCIF because they would have these meetings, a SCIF, a secure facility. He would have meetings with intelligence officials. And for the first time, they asked him to do something, he said, on U.S. soil, collecting customer information for them, that he said was clearly unconstitutional and illegal. This is, again, 2001, prior to the 9/11 attacks. And when he refused to do it, the other phone companies, he said, went along. Not only did they cancel their super valuable dark contracts with the company, suddenly he found himself charged by the federal government with insider trading, and he went to prison for a time. So I think this is a really dangerous thing. The government has these tools and this potential, I would call it blackmail material at their disposal. And then I would also point out to your listeners, Glenn, it's not just one operation, somebody that goes through an NSA database improperly, or FBI agents that turn in false information for a wiretap. There are many operations we now know about, including in my case, some of the spying that was done on me was done through a rogue team out of the Baltimore U.S. Attorney's Office under Rod Rosenstein. And we know that from a former federal agent involved, as well as the forensics. So there's all kinds of teams, dark groups, rogue operations that could be doing different aspects of this kind of spying, and all connected to the government.
Give me some hope. What is being done to? I mean, I've had congressmen and senators come to me and say that they have been they've received veiled threats from the intelligence community when they're in small groups. People have come in and said, we have some information that some of your colleagues, and you may be in this room, are working with foreign governments, and we just want you to know, for your protection, we're monitoring things, but just know that we're on it. And they received that as a threat. One of them said, are you telling us you're monitoring all of our communications? And the response was, I'm not at liberty to say one way or another. And they took that as a threat, whether they're following through with that or not. They're members of Congress that truly believe that they are being watched and listened to. And when you have that kind of a system against you, you have no chance of doing the right thing, in Congress and standing for the people. You don't stand a chance.
Well, let me tell you a couple of incidents that have been documented. We know that in 2009 that the intel community, the NSA, secretly recorded and listened in on Democrat Congresswoman Jane Harman because somebody ultimately leaked her name to the press, as well as some recordings. Same thing happened to Dennis Kucinich, a congressman, another Democrat. This happens to both parties. This is not something that's isolated to one over time. I mean, it's a fact. And then I was told some years back by a staffer for a top member of the Senate, kind of similar to what you're saying, that they were called in, these staffers, by intel officials and told, we're going to be looking at your phone records. Again, this is something people kind of accept now in a way, I think, which they shouldn't. This is stunning that our intelligence agencies would be listening in on members of Congress and their staff. This is something that should never happen. And the staffer told me they were just stunned to be told that this was going to happen. And I said, well, did anybody in the meeting, any of these congressional staffers, speak up and tell these intelligence people not to do it? And he said, no. And I said, why not? He said, we were afraid we would look guilty of something if we did, because supposedly the intelligence officials were looking for leaks to the press or something. So nobody wanted to say no for fear of looking guilty. And this was years ago. I think they've been doing that ever since, and we're probably doing that prior to that, and collecting all kinds of information that, yes, could conceivably be used against members of Congress and their staff.
Sharyl Attkisson, if you have not seen her investigative work recently, make sure you follow Full Measure. It comes out once a week, and it is really good. Also, her books are tremendous. Her latest is Slanted. You can find her at SharylAttkisson.com. That's SharylAttkisson.com, or you can follow her on Twitter at Sharyl Attkisson. Thank you so much, Sharyl. Appreciate it. God bless.
Thanks. Take care.